This is Alan from Alpus Group, and I'm going to talk to you today about a book that I became aware of from Property CEO, and the authors of the book are Ian Chard and Richie Clapson. And the title is Industrial to Residential Conversions, the Essential Guide to Converting Industrial Buildings for Profit, revised and updated August 2021. Now, I've heard Richie Clapson speak on a number of occasions. I haven't heard Ian Chard speak on this subject, but I think it's a very interesting subject, industrial to residential conversions, because it opens up a whole sector to the possibility of converting redundant or underused industrial buildings for profit. All profits from the sale of this book go to Kids Out, the Fun and Happiness Children's Charity, which is a great cause. We'll note that other books by Ian Chard and Richie Clapson are The Guide to Small-Scale Property Development and The Rise of the Landlord Developer. And then Ian Chard has written Your Own Personal Time Machine, Get Your Life Back. There's a disclaimer, as you'd expect in this book, and there are various links to social media dedications regarding the book. And then here's the table of contents. So I'll have a quick run through this just to make you aware of it. Introduction, what you'll learn from the book, who are Property CEO and why should you listen to us, what makes Property CEO different, and the importance of education. And I can tell you, Property CEO is an education company that is associated with Simon Zucchi's Property Investment Network. Not part of it, but they formed a recent association. So you can probably see that those two organisations are working closely together on occasions. Second title is Some Fundamental Principles, Development versus Other Property Strategies, the story of Old Esmeralda and the magic ingredients. And then heading 3 is The Exciting World of Property Development. How does development differ from other property strategies? Who is property development good for? Who is property development not so good for? What's in a name? Property developers don't build houses. Become a property CEO. Risk and reward versus professional fees. And then 4, the property CEO system. Why you need a system. Your non-executive advisor. And how much competition is there for industrial conversions. 5 is deal analysis and due diligence. So what exactly is deal analysis? The golden rules. Technical corner, contingency, and sourcing project finance and understanding risks. Type of finance available, your credibility, special purpose vehicles, technical corner, the training gap, back to credibility, personal guarantees, de-risking by the bank, private investors, technical corner, pensions, a friendly word about JV partnerships, and then industrial conversions, which is the subject of the title. What do we mean by converting an industrial building? Understanding the use class system, that's the class system of planning uses, essentially the purpose that a building is permitted to use. Use class changes from September 2020, planning considerations, introducing permitted development. What do industrial buildings look like? The basic approach to converting a building. The significant advantages of industrial conversions, creating a competitive edge, off-market opportunities, how to find opportunities, different types of industrial conversion, what does a good opportunity look like, technical corner size, technical corner the development management fee, what is the ideal project size, the McDonald's influence, creating a deal assessment checklist, where to find potential projects. Heading 9 is contacting owners directly, a story about a direct-to-owner approach, identifying a building's owner, how to approach owners, technical corner, avoiding the blagging it minefield, preparation is critical, finding a connection, the power of networking. Heading 10 is knowing what to build. What type of residential units should you build? A word about premium property data applications, the three-step MAC process, using Rightmove, matching the ideal unit type to your host property, check with local estate agents, which agents should you ask, some further estate agent considerations, how many units can I fit into the site, understanding block planning, what is the likely development cost of the conversion, how much should you pay for the host building, following a system. And heading 11 is understanding permitted development rights. What is permitted development and why does it exist? Historical legislation, exemptions and limitations, the 2020 changes, local authority application considerations, the fallback position, the position from 1st of August 2021, how to get full planning permission for essential changes. Heading 12 is planning implications, understanding planning risk, other expenses you may incur, the planning process, local authority time limits, what can go wrong, submitting an application, technical corner asbestos, mitigating planning risk, planning considerations, the 2020 planning paper. Heading 13 is space planning, thinking laterally, the internal courtyard, different courtyard types, importance of outward aspects, access to flats, overlooking, bin and cycle stores. Heading 14 is natural light, why natural light is needed, common natural light challenges, light solutions, getting the decor right. 15 is thermal insulation, walls, technical corner insulation, roofs, floors, external openings, final considerations of thermal insulation. 16 is services implications, drainage, water, electrical, gas, avoiding delays, registering the new addresses. 17 is building without foundations, typical problems with groundworks, technical corner foundations, the advantages of using the existing slab. 18 is creating a design advantage, exploiting architectural advantages, hiring an interior designer, the advantage of light, the wow factor list. 19 is marketing your units, start with your estate agent, how to price your units, marketing strategies compared, pre-development, post-development, when to start marketing. Heading 20 is further learning and next steps, taking things forward, and then acknowledgements and a couple of appendices. So the introduction will go into a little bit of this book just to get an idea what the approach is from Property CEO. Welcome to the world of Property CEO. It's great to have you with us. We hope you find it a fascinating insight into the little-known property development strategy known as industrial conversions. And I'll confess that Property CEO is the only organisation I've heard talking about industrial conversions. I'm aware that you can convert light industrial buildings that are in residential areas into residential. These are opportunities for permitted development, and I think this is probably that strategy expressed in a slightly different way, expressed as industrial to residential. So what exactly have you let yourself in for? Well, in broad terms, we hope you'll get to the end of the book and think that, number one, property development isn't as difficult or challenging as you thought it was, and it's something you could definitely do yourself, even if you've never done it before. Item 2 is industrial conversions is just about the least competitive property strategy there is at the moment, so you might want to consider taking a closer look before anyone else does. 3, there may be some industrial conversion opportunities hiding in plain sight near you that you've never noticed before and which will leap out at you, not literally, but now that you know exactly how to take advantage of them. And item 4 is now is the best time to get yourself educated and to start taking advantage. We have actually looked at one or two of these, and I can recall one workshop in Farnham that we looked at, but it was being chased by so many developers that we didn't get anywhere with that one. Our expression of interest wasn't actually followed up. But yeah, there are these sort of workshops around. Typically they can be garages or tyre repair workshops, small industrial units in residential areas. So the background to the area is that it's residential, so if you can acquire the commercial stroke industrial site for the right price, then it does usually give potential for profitable development. So it all sounds pretty straightforward and quite exciting, but it would be only fair to give you the flip side as well. So here's what this book isn't. It's not an end-to-end detailed how-to, step-by-step, brick-by-brick Duffer's Guide to Converting Industrial Buildings or Developing Property. That would be a much bigger book and more technical by far. In other words, it's not a manual. It isn't a vehicle for plugging our property development training, although given that our training is our day job here at Property CEO, we've described who we are and what we do. Plus we mentioned training a smidge later on and in the final chapter. We promise you'll barely notice it. Rest assured the rest of the book is plug free. It's not a guide on how to cost or appraise the financial viability of a development project. This merits a separate book on its own right, and in any event is not a subject exclusive to industrial conversions. The appraisal process applies to any type of property development. And 4, it's not a dull and boring technical textbook. Reason we've not gone into all the technical stuff is we wanted to get you interested in taking up property development as a strategy. There we've said it, our cards are well and truly on the table and we're only 2 pages in. Frankly, this won't happen if we let Richie unleash all this almost 40 years of property development experience on you in one go, or if we try and give you a Haynes manual on property development and start backing on about load bearing capacities and dry lining. That said, we'll be giving you lots of juicy stuff so you can get your appetite well and truly whetted. Plus we'll try and give you some non-technical explanations of some of the considerations that are by their nature technical. By the end of the book, you know all the fundamental principles that will enable you to take on an industrial conversion project yourself, if that's what you decide to do. But you'll still need to get yourself a broader education in property development to be able to put it into practice. But rest assured we won't leave you high and dry. If you decide you want to take things to the next stage, we'll explain what your choices are in the last chapter. In short, the purpose of the book is to allow you to understand the opportunities presented by industrial conversion projects, the specific challenges you'll encounter and concepts you can use to overcome them. You can then decide whether it's a strategy you might like to pursue, either on its own or as part of a broader strategy. We've tried to avoid using jargon in the book since, like many industries, property development is not without its very own buzzwords, abbreviations, terminology and slang. Apologies if you like a good buzzword, but hopefully this way makes it easier for everyone else to follow along. Before we move on, there's one more resource you might find useful. One of the challenges with writing a book like this is that a lot of potential rabbit holes to dive down. Property development has a lot of moving parts, and to cover them all here wouldn't be practical, since we'd end up writing a book about everything. We'd start heading towards industrial conversions and have to dive off into how to raise finance or how to create a compelling brand. So the journey would end up a bit like a Ronnie Corbett monologue, but without the gags. One solution is to suggest that you do one of our training courses where you get to learn about all these things, but of course that comes at a cost. So we created a resource called the Property CEO podcast that's not only completely free, but also aims to be entertaining and educational. Whether it succeeds is open to debate, but we've tried to ensure that each episode provides useful information on a specific subject. Where we come across a potential rabbit hole in this book, we've included a reference to a particular podcast episode that covers that point. You can then get some further information on it completely free of charge, courtesy of Property CEO, and we promise there are no adverts or sales pitches, just the information we think you'll find useful. Where we reference the podcast, you'll see a little sign like that. You can access the podcast on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Stitcher, or for the more traditional approach, simply listening on www.propertyco/podcasts. As we arrived in 2020, the world took an interesting turn and the property development industry was very much affected, along with everyone else on the planet. Not surprisingly, it focused the minds of many people who realized that events outside their control could so easily impact their financial well-being. Out of nowhere, careers and businesses that had been on full steam ahead were suddenly derailed, and it prompted many to look at property development as a means of creating wealth that gave them a more certain, independent future. That's when we decided to effectively relaunch the podcast as a live webinar show called Open Door. Unfortunately for the audience, it meant they could now see us as well as hear us. But on the plus side, it allowed us to directly answer the questions people were asking about getting into development. You're very welcome to join us for the next Open Door show. Just go to www.propertyceo.co.uk webinars to book your place. Anyway, we digress. Back to the book. We also recognise some people like technical stuff while others don't. You don't need to be a technical person to be a property developer, but for those of you who like to understand the whys and wherefores, we've included some sections that explain things in a bit more detail. If there's an explanation that might put a non-techie to sleep, we've stuck a box around it, blown a small fortune on a nifty italic font and called it Technical Corner. Actually, it's not that technical and it's often quite interesting, but you at least have the choice to avoid it if you want to. But all that comes later. For now, let's get started. So who are Property CEO and why should you listen to us? And then the book goes on to describe the two authors, particularly Ian Charles and Richie Capson. Richie Capson is a qualified structural engineer with 40 years experience. He's got some major projects under his belt and hundreds of smaller ones. He's retired apart from doing his property CEO business, and he's quite an amusing, entertaining speaker with a lot of experience and I think quite a sensible approach to property development. He cautions people against using the traditional planning permission route because the system is broken, and anyone who's got experience knows just how expensive and frustrating the system could be. But Richie sees an opportunity with permitted development rights, and he's focused on one very small niche within those permitted development rights, which is the industrial to residential conversions. And he's the only person that I'm aware of who actually talks about this particular niche. As I say, I am aware of it from Nimbus maps, and we've identified a few sites which come under this category into industrial to residential. But what we see them as is light industrial. They're workshops, and they tend to be in residential areas. So I think you struggle to actually convert an industrial building in an industrial zone into residential. I know it has been done, and people have even done residential conversions with no windows, which is bizarre and totally undesirable. What the developer should be doing is developing residential units of homes that people actually want to buy and want to live in. So I think this idea that you can convert a sort of quasi-industrial structure into residential is difficult to do, and to do acceptably. And Richie does talk about daylight, especially as being a consideration. And this is one of the key factors that differentiates residential accommodation. You need to have daylight and you need to have ventilation, and that needs to be ideally in a residential zone area. So it doesn't take anything away from this book. It's an excellent book, and I will be reading it in full myself, and I would suggest that you have a look at it as well if you think that industrial to residential conversion is something you'd like to do. Personally, I think it's only part of a total suite of projects that can be done under permitted development, and there are probably more opportunities out there in commercial to residential rather than industrial, but they're certainly possible, and you can look for these workshops in your area, or garages sometimes, where the garage is struggling to survive in business. The premises come up for sale, and they can be converted easily into residential accommodation, especially if they're in the right area. So we won't go into any more of the detail of this book, but that's fundamentally the point of this book, and I'd recommend it as a worthwhile read. And Richie Clapson certainly has the experience and the capability to entertain you as well as educate you about this method of property development. Cheers for now.